really wealthy women.
Smart man.
That's a trick I'd like to learn.
And the wealthy thing was that she owned horses.
That's also smart. Well, in any event, I swear this came out at the first episode of this, but I think a lot of you weren't here. But Harry says I should bring it up again because for a brief moment as a 7-year-old child, I ran into this old gentleman on Ojai Avenue next to Bald Street, coincidentally. And I was completely unaware of town geography in 1962, but I must have just gotten my haircut over by where OBC is today, because there's a barber shop there. I guess I was wandering around enjoying my new short hair, and I ran into this old gentleman somehow who was kind of standing on the sidewalk, and he struck up a conversation with me. And he told me his name was Howard Bald, and he said, now behind me is a street that's named after me, after him, Howard Bald. So I was very impressed by that. And so I remember him to be a kindly older gentleman. To my mind's eye, he was probably in his 70s, although he's probably only 40. No, he was definitely older, and white hair, balding, very sprightly gentleman, kind of thin and short of stature, and wearing a suit and a tie and a vest like gentlemen born in the late 1800s used to wear around in the 1960s. So that was my brief brush with Howard Bald, who I had no idea who he was until just the last few years. So anyway, thank you.
Back to the Pines for just a moment. So the way the story goes is J.D. Reyes planted the original grove of pines, they burned, and then Bald, is that right? Bald went up and replanted them? Is that the way the story goes?
I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm sorry.
There were some accounts of Howard Bald actually taking water up, the seedlings and then water up it,
I wouldn't doubt that.
by horseback up and
I think I heard
It was
that.
Hoopy.
I think after the 32 fire, the trees came to the Los Padres National Forest and, or whatever it was called back then, Santa Barbara National Forest. But anyway, this wasn't a pine forest, and so they knew they couldn't survive. And so the main thing is they had to have, we had a big fire, all the rangers and the fire crews that can, go to the fire, that were there. But these trees came in, and they had to hire someone to stay up there for the summer and make sure that the trees survived. And I know that there was a fantastic garden of vegetables up there as well. And there's a nice spring that runs up there at the Pines. It doesn't look like there should be one, but there is one there.
Yeah.
And that was their survival.
Is anybody aware that this south face right here ever had conifers on it?
I don't think it ever did. No.
Okay.
It's an arid forest.
I was just wondering if we needed to replant it.
Well, go ahead.
They have, the pines to the south of us and then to the north. But Boyd Simpson, who's the botanist for the National Forest here, happens to be stationed in Ohio. The other day, he told me that no, there was no pines here that he's aware of.
This is a
It doesn't, you wonder why, because there's some just to the south and some to the north.
Yeah.
There's this blank area.
And this would have been the first place to take them from.
And that's what some people say, yes, they were here, they were taken. But that's kind of a myth. But I think he says he doesn't have any information that they were ever here.
two things about the conifers. One is, in this area, the most common conifer is actually the big-cone Douglas fir, the pseudo-macrocarpa, and that grows in the north-facing slopes, where it gets some shade and has slightly wetter feet. On the right here is a photo of the pines. Fairly recent year was what?
2014.
2014. A lot of these trees are suffering from the current drought, the bark beetle infestation. So now when you hike up the Horn Canyon Trail, you know, at about 2.5 miles, you see the southern half of the trees are all just kind of this russet red, and they have to be removed soon enough. There were a few trees that came down in 2012 and 2013, I guess, and was that the crew or the fire crew?
Forest Service.
Probably the Forest Service fire crews. They cut up some of the trees and they made some really nice benches and kind of kitchenware out of it. So the trees live to serve another purpose.
I think one of the Ford boys did, when he was working in the Ojai district, hacked down from the top, and I think he took a chainsaw jig down there and they made the lumber.
Cool.
Looks better than the furniture in my house and stuff. Your boy man up there, that's nice. I was up there in the spring, and I would say 70% of those trees are looking pretty sad.
And the spring was dry.
And the spring was dry.
The spring actually had water in June, though. I took my Cub Scouts up there, and the headmaster Mulligan. I don't. Not that I really need this. No. We ran into the headmaster, Mike Mulligan, at Thatcher, and he had just had some students up there, and they'd reconnected the spring. And we were actually going up there with gallons and gallons of water, expecting it to be dry. So I had myself and a bunch of other scout dads. We had a total of 19 gallons on our back, you know, because we all think we're like Mike Gurley, we can do anything. So we hiked up to drop off the water, but the spring was running. So when we actually took the Cubs there the next week, they're like, "Wow, look at all the water that's here." Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, you talk about personalities in the Los Padres. Another name that comes up is a guy by the name of Frank Felt. Frank was known as the Sage of the Sespe, and his house still exists. Where's that, between like Potrero?
Just near Chorro Grande.
Chorro Grande.
Trailhead.
Yeah, there's a red cabin off to the left-hand side as you go up Highway 33. The story of Frank Felt, he worked in Los Angeles selling Ortega chilies back in the early 1900s and developed some stomach problems. His doctor said that unless he stopped taking part in the business world, that he would continue to have these health problems. So he packed up, moved up to the Sespe and built a cabin where he lived on and off for 40 or 50 years. There was one of his favorite activities was taking part in the Ramona pageant, which was an outdoor play. He took part in that every year, playing the father in that production. There was a woman who was also involved with that production that they fell in love, and after he moved up to the Sespe, he looked out his window one day, heard 4 horses coming up the trail. Lo and behold, it was his beloved.
Aww.
And they got married and settled down and lived this remote life up there in the Sespe. And Frank Felt, the Sage of the Sespe, wrote poetry. He would sell his poems down at Wheeler Hot Springs. He made custom frames for them out of native wood and wrote these great poems. And it just so happens that Rick brought a book. He wrote 2 books, Frank Felt did, of poetry, and Rick has a copy of one of his. I think Rick might just treat us to one of the Sage of the Sespe's poems.
All right. I don't know how many of you have been up to his old homestead. I knew one of the former owners, Partner Hicks. I don't know if anybody here knows Partner Hicks. That's a real name, by the way. His mother gave it. And he lived up there himself for some years, and I visited up there, not when Frank was there, but when Partner was there. And it was kind of on this hilltop on the north side of Highway 33, this plateau up there. And there was kind of a rough cabin up there, and chickens running around, and different people living on the property. That was in the 70s. Yes, indeed. So Frank Felt published these books of poetry. So one of them was Songs of the Sespe, and the other one was Sunset on the Sespe. I only have Songs of the Sespe, but Bart's books, actually where I got this one, tells me that these are not very hard to acquire. And in fact, there were 3 printings of these, one in 34, 44, and 46. This one that I have actually has a photo of Frank Felt in the frontispiece. And it has him in his pose as the Catholic priest in the Ramona play. And indeed, he did that for some, I think it was like 23 years. He'd go out from his idol up in the mountains and do this play in Hemet, right? In Southern California, south of here. So anyway, the poems that he wrote were, some of them seem to be about his life up at the homestead. And it actually was a homestead. He homesteaded that land according to his writings as a government homestead. So it must have been 160 acres. I remember Hardner telling me that what he had was 100 acres. So I don't know if part of it had been sold off or what. In any event, these poems are kind of, well, they're rhyming poems as opposed to prose poems. And they're kind of the type that I think of cowboy poetry a little bit. You know, like there's poems about coffee and beans and the weather and the chickens and brush and so on and so forth. At the top of some of these poems, he'll give a little description about what he's talking about, and reveals in that something about his life up there. Because I think he's somewhat of a mystery. I mean, you noted some things I've never even heard of before. But so anyway, I'm going to read you one of the poems, and it's not super long. For those of you, the mere mention of poetry makes your eyeballs go back in your head. So you know, it'll only last like 20 seconds or so. And it's about a subject that if you live out in the boonies, it would be something that you would definitely be concerned with, which is basically the weather. And I think you'll be able to relate to it anyway, even if you live in town, because of the drought that we're in. So, just give me a second here. So this is called Looks Like Rain. And it's from Songs of